The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
Welcome to the show. Welcome to everyone watching from the I Love It When I Wake Up in the Morning and Barack Obama is President Facebook page, the We Survive Bush, You'll Survive Obama Facebook page, and from all over the internet, Lewis. 2 p.m. Eastern, 11 a.m. Pacific, Monday through Thursday. Yesterday we were talking about, I have to issue a correction. We were talking about Joe Biden wanting to be president in 2016, and then after that I went into a story about Joe Biden gaffing, saying, I'm proud to be the president. It turns out that I also, apparently, because I was thinking of that gaffe, referred to Joe Biden as the president during the first story. I have the video. We will play it, and then we will move on, Lewis, please, if we may. I don't like having to do this, but it is the correct thing.
I love it.
Here's me yesterday. The article, which is online, again, it's from Politico, states basically that President Biden met with 200 Democratic insiders on Sunday night to talk about President Biden. Okay, so we got it out of the way.
I didn't notice it either. Apparently, I was in the zone.
Natan afterwards said he wasn't even sure, right? But Natan, you said I might have said it.
Well, I was going to correct you on the air because it sounded like you had said it, but I was afraid that I was going to be wrong and you actually hadn't said it, so I didn't say anything.
Right. Okay, so there we go. I made a mistake, and I guess we're all having Freudian-related slips when it comes to Vice President Joseph Biden.
Everything's okay, though.
Everything's fine.
Yeah.
You know what's also fine? Hillary Clinton's handling of a lot of outrageous questioning at these Benghazi hearings. For months and months, we've been hearing about all the conspiracies surrounding the Benghazi violence. And when are we going to have hearings? And Hillary Clinton's stomach bug and concussion and blood clot are all obviously staged. And what other conspiracies were there? Who changed the talking points on Benghazi and all this stuff? We finally got Hillary Clinton to the hearings, and basically not much happened other than Republicans trying to sandbag her, and Hillary Clinton really doing a fantastic job as outgoing Secretary of State of shutting down just nonsense from a lot of different people. I have 3 examples for you. The first one was an exchange with Senator Ron Johnson, Republican from Wisconsin. Of course, he was accusing the Obama administration of misleading the public by saying the Benghazi attack was a spontaneous protest, but it was planned, but then it was spontaneous, so on and so forth. And Hillary Clinton basically just saying, what does it matter at this point? Let's listen first to the beginning of Ron Johnson's questioning of Secretary of State Clinton.
And again, I appreciate the fact of the transparency of this hearing. But why weren't we transparent at that point in time?
Right.
Well, first of all, Senator, I would say that once the assault happened and once we got our people rescued and out, our most immediate concern was, number one, taking care of their injuries. As I said, I still have a DS agent at Walter Reed seriously injured. Getting them into Frankfurt, Ramstein to get taken care of. The FBI going over immediately to start talking to them. We did not think it was appropriate for us to talk to them before the FBI conducted their interviews. So,
all right, so it was a lot of this stuff. And then eventually Hillary Clinton just gets very irritated with what's going on, as I would too, because at this point, ladies and gentlemen, we've gotten past layer 1, which is that there was some kind of conspiracy to hide what was going on. We've gotten past that. So now the focus is on, well, you didn't know soon enough what it was. And Hillary Clinton basically just says, I'm not going to stand for this.
Now, we have no doubt they were terrorists, they were militants, they attacked us, they killed our people. But what was going on and why they were doing what they were doing
No. Again, we were misled that there were supposedly protests and then something sprang out of that, an assault sprang out of that. And that was easily ascertained that was not the fact. And the American people could have known that within days, and they didn't know that.
With all due respect, the fact is we had 4 dead Americans. Was it because of a protest, or was it because of guys out for a walk one night who decided they'd go kill some Americans? What difference at this point does it make? It is our job to figure out what happened and do everything we can to prevent it from ever happening again, Senator. Now,
this is not a surprising line of questioning from Ron Johnson, right? Because after all, his Senate seat was essentially bought and paid for by family money and the Koch brothers, okay? He is essentially a know-nothing in business, and he is basically just going out there and he's doing trivial stuff. He didn't do his homework. He was trying to ask something relevant, and he's still insisting with this stuff. And what are we doing, ladies and gentlemen? And if you think this is bad, wait until the next one's, Lewis. This is the level of questioning that we have for the Secretary of State.
Right. It's just, it seems to be an attempt to make her look bad.
Right. And it didn't really work.
Why? I don't know. She's not going to be Secretary of State anymore.
Well, I think that what might be going on here, since the 2012 election is already long gone, they're trying to just make a big deal out of this, even though it isn't, so that then in 4 years, if Hillary decides to run, it'll be something that they go back to and they say, look at this huge flaw in her resume. Look,
it could be.
Remember the Benghazi thing?
I don't know if Ron Johnson has that foresight.
Well, that's the thing. He
The
doesn't know
Koch
what he's
brothers do,
doing.
though.
He's asking
Yeah.
what somebody put in front of him.
That's
He has
true.
no idea what's going
That's
on.
true. The Koch brothers, they certainly have a big interest in who wins 4 years from now.
Remember Republicans, Congressman Joe Wilson, who yelled out, "You lie," when President Obama was giving a State of the Union address? He decided to ask the hard-hitting question, Lewis, because listen, Secretary of State, months to get her in that room. Now you can finally ask her all the questions you need to ask. And Joe Wilson says what? Why didn't you go on Sunday television talk shows? Why didn't you go on Sunday television talk shows? Listen to this.
It's been reported that since you managed the response to the Benghazi attack, why weren't you the person to appear on the Sunday shows immediately following the attack?
Because she was managing the
Ambassador
response.
Susan Rice said that you declined. Was that correct?
Well, I have to confess here in public, going on the Sunday shows is not my favorite thing to do. There are other things I'd prefer to do on Sunday mornings. And, you know, I haven't been on a Sunday show in way over a year. So it just isn't something that I normally jump to do. And I did feel strongly that we had a lot that we had to manage, that I had to respond to, and I thought that should be my priority.
Now, I have to tell you, this isn't a great answer.
Terrible answer.
Yes. The reality is, wow, a congressional hearing asking why weren't you talking to Bob Schieffer on Sunday morning? Because really, hey, listen, you're the Secretary of State. Why aren't you talking to Bob Schieffer? You've got to be kidding me that You Lie Joe Wilson is even asking this question. But given the fact that he did, her response wasn't that great. The question was...
Her response was terrible.
The response just wasn't that good. I mean, it's kind of like an I didn't feel like it. I don't really like it, and I didn't feel like going on there, and I was busy with other stuff. Really, this, I think, was the place where she should have said, I find it unconscionable that you, Joe Wilson, after all of the discussion of getting me here in this chair to ask me questions about the nitty-gritty of what happened, are wasting the few minutes you have to ask about why wasn't I doing what corporate mainstream media was asking me to do. I think it is shameful, Congressman Wilson. But now she just said, yeah, I don't really like going on those shows and I was kind of busy. Not a great answer. Embarrassing question.
I think all she needed to say was, that's not my job.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Some form of that, essentially.
Right.
And she could have drawn it out in a way to really show how absurd the question was. So there's Joe Wilson, remember, of You Lie fame. Third, I want to go to Rand Paul. Kentucky Senator Rand Paul, son of Ron Paul. He comes out with basically a scolding of Hillary Clinton. Now, I don't know if somebody, again, a lot of what we see in these hearings is just stuff that someone wrote for the senator or a member of Congress that's asking the questions. Maybe Rand Paul really wanted to make a big show of scolding Hillary Clinton as if he is somehow more competent or senior to her or overseeing her work in some way or the authority. But he really made himself look absolutely ridiculous. And let's take a listen to what he had to say. Listen to this exchange, okay?
Paul. Thank you for appearing, Secretary Clinton, and I'm glad to see your health is improving.
Right.
One of the things that disappointed me most about the original 9/11 was no one was fired. We spent trillions of dollars, but there were a lot of human errors. These are judgment errors, and the people who make judgment errors need to be replaced, fired, and no longer in a position of making these judgment calls. So we have a review board. The review board finds 64 different things that we could change. A lot of them are common sense and should be done, but the question is, it's a failure of leadership that they weren't done in advance, and 4 lives were cost because of this.
Right.
I'm glad that you're accepting responsibility. I think that ultimately with your leaving, you accept the culpability for the worst tragedy since 9/11.
Okay,
And
now
I
let's
really
stop right there. Let's stop right. I want to stop on that. The worst tragedy since 9/11 was 4 people dying at a consulate. Okay, let's assume for a second that we're not talking about incidents where people died broadly over the last 12 years.
Like a couple wars?
Right.
Okay.
Let's just assume we're talking specifically about deaths at consulates or embassies. Even if we restrict it to that list, the incident in Benghazi is not even near the top of that list. I mean, Lewis, Pakistan, Karachi, 2002. 10 Americans attacked and killed at a U.S. consulate. U.S. Embassy in Uzbekistan in 2004. 11 attacked, 2 killed, 9 injured. U.S. Consulate in Saudi Arabia, 2004. 8 killed. U.S. Embassy in Syria, 2006. 1 killed. U.S. Embassy in Yemen, 2008. 10 killed. Does he have any idea what's going on?
No.
This is the epitome of incompetence. Is he reading garbage someone wrote for him? Or is he hoping nobody knows about this list? Or is he forgetting about all the non-consulate and right? Even if we restrict deaths at consulates and embassies since 9/11, I just read you a list of 6 that were worse. What's wrong with this guy?
I wonder what he would be saying if it was a Republican.
Of course.
If
That's
it would
the
be
question.
completely different. He would be defending that person, even if things had happened the exact same way. This is just another attempt to make Hillary Clinton look bad.
And then to even try to shame her more, I'll play the last part where he says if he were president, he would have fired her. That's a scary thought. If Rand Paul were president.
In that, had I been president at the time and I found that you did not read the cables from Benghazi, you did not read the cables from Ambassador Stevens, I would have relieved you of your post. I think it's inexcusable.
There you go. Now, I won't even... This diatribe doesn't even warrant a response, so I won't even play Hillary Clinton's response. That's basically what we got. The Republicans were desperate for the hearings. Who changed the talking points on Benghazi? Was it a planned attack or a spontaneous thing? You got her there. You asked why wasn't she on TV. You made up stuff about the worst tragedy since 9/11, and you tried to make yourself look better just by scolding her and getting your nonsense comments on the record. Congratulations, Republicans. You got what you wanted.
Throwing out hypotheticals if I were president.
Yeah.
Very productive.
Very brilliant stuff. Okay, then John Kerry's confirmation hearing started today. I watched some of them. I don't expect any issues at all with John Kerry being confirmed as Secretary of State, longtime Massachusetts senator. We've had him on this show 2 or 3 times, and we had John McCain joking at the conclusion of a press conference yesterday or the day before, saying that we look forward to interrogating him at his hearing mercilessly. We will bring back for the only time waterboarding to get the truth. So John McCain doing material in advance of the John Kerry hearings. It's mostly just a show. Ron Johnson, actually, interestingly enough, Senator Ron Johnson from Wisconsin tried to go Benghazi, I was reading, on John Kerry today, and Kerry basically just brushed it off. And Ron Johnson's not doing too well in these hearings. 2 days in a row of just looking like a complete buffoon.
Luckily, he's got billionaires to back him in elections.
He does, yeah. There's like a template for these hearings, and it's even more cookie cutter. The Supreme Court confirmation hearings, you know in advance, it's basically, let's try to get the nominee to say something about abortion. The nominee will basically say nothing. If they're a Republican nominee, they will say something to not make liberals think they want to overturn Roe v. Wade. If it's a Democratic Supreme Court nominee, they will say something that won't make Republicans think that they want abortion for all on demand. And that's basically it, right? There's and no matter what you ask about, you get the same answer. Let's recreate it. Try to ask me about abortion. I'm the Supreme Court nominee.
David, do you believe Roe v. Wade should be upheld?
Listen, Senator, first of all, I want to thank you so much for having me here today for this hearing. And of course, I want to thank your staff because they've been so nice in preparing for this meeting. And we had the chance to meet in your office yesterday, and it was just magical. And of course, thank you to the staff and the individuals who are filling the water and all of the photographers sitting on the floor, because it's been fantastic. Oh, right, your question. You were asking me about Roe v. Wade. Roe v. Wade is settled law. It's been decided already. Now, if the question is about if new arguments were to be made with respect to medical procedures, it would be improper of me to comment or speculate about how I might rule, because those are issues, unfortunately, Senator, that may come before the court. And as of course, I, as a judge, I would go into every case with a completely open mind. So with regard to anything that's already been decided, I can't comment because it's been decided. And with any hypotheticals about future things that may come up, I can't comment because I may be tainting my future. I can't show my hand. I certainly do not prejudge. Next question, Senator.
And that's a perfect example of just about every hearing that takes place.
It's all it is.
Yeah.
That's the whole thing. So anyway, no matter who is next nominated, that's essentially what you're going to get, unless they're completely unqualified like Harriet Miers was when George W. Bush nominated her. And then hopefully we won't even get to confirmation hearings because they'll drop out from the mere shame of realizing that they're just not qualified to do the job.
Right.
On today's bonus show, drunk driving permits have been approved. Guess where? We'll talk about it on the bonus show. We'll also talk about a college student expelled for reporting a security problem. And we'll talk about a new study which says it can track those football brain injuries with PET scans. If you're not getting the bonus show, get the bonus show. It's very easy. You go to our website, davidpakman.com/membership. You sign up, you get the bonus show and a bunch of other great member benefits, and you support the show. Let's take a break. Next, Dennis Campbell. North Korea is not launching missiles, all sorts of stuff. Stay with us.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Welcome back to the David Pakman Show. Please consider a David Pakman Show membership made possible in part by liberalbias.com. Liberals think they're so cool with their fancy statistics and math, but conservatives still have numerology. Think about that and go to liberalbias.com to find out more. Today's new member of the day, Jan Helge Lilovic. It is great to have Jan aboard. And we thank Jan significantly. We also, as we do every Thursday, thank Dennis Campbell for being here. Dennis is editor-in-chief of UK Progressive Magazine, also host of Worldview Show at youtube.com/Worldview Show. Dennis, I've been reading about Egypt being set to receive some F-16s, and the American State Department is refusing to delay delivery to what is essentially the Muslim Brotherhood-run Egypt at this point. Now, there are some in the U.S. who are saying it's dangerous to arm a group that is at the very least unstable, and by some accounts, well, unstable, I guess, is where I will leave it, and I'll turn it over to you. What are the two sides to this story?
Well, you obviously have a government that is under the control of the Muslim Brotherhood, but let us not underestimate who is still really in charge of Egypt, and that is the SCAF, the Supreme Council of the Armed Forces. They are still very much in control, despite whatever pronouncements Egypt's President Morsi, who is the head of the Muslim Brotherhood, may have made. And there's really only two groups in Egypt that are in charge at this point, or are showing any semblance of having a government.
So
and
maybe, are you
Morsi's,
alluding to, just to be clear, are you alluding to Morsi's comments that Jews may be the descendants of apes and pigs?
I wasn't alluding to that as much as I was alluding to how he is beginning to feel his oats a bit. He attempted to fire Field Marshal General Tantawi, who has been the effective leader of the country. He has gone through the process of rushing a constitutional referendum to the polls, but now that is being seen as being deeply flawed and in fact perhaps a corrupt election. And indeed, we've been talking to a couple of people who will be featuring on our show, which have been looking very deeply into, having just come back from Egypt, both of them, what is going on inside of the country, especially in light of the fact that tomorrow it begins on the 25th of January, the start of the revolution 2 years on.
The State Department wrote a letter on January 8th to Republican Senator James Inhofe from Oklahoma, responding to criticism he had made of this, saying that arming Egypt's Muslim Brotherhood serves the U.S.'s regional security interests. So in reading between the lines, is this not kind of the enemy of my enemy is kind of my friend type of thing? In other words, arming Egypt specifically may not serve U.S. security interests, but in the broad scope of the region, arming Egypt may be a good thing.
Well, we've been arming Egypt for the last 30 years, and that's something to keep in mind. I mean, we were arming Egypt long before that, actually, from the time of Anwar Sadat. The arming of Egypt has long been a reward for keeping the peace on the southern borders there with Israel. And that's been in the U.S. foreign policy and foreign interests for a number of years. It got a bit dicey with the overthrow of Mubarak because, quite frankly, the U.S. couldn't decide which side it was going to be on. It stayed with Mubarak for too long and then abruptly dropped him and moved over to sort of look as though they were on the side of the student revolutionaries. But now most of those that were involved in the uprising had been pushed off to the side because, indeed, as you mentioned, the Muslim Brotherhood had now come from being an illegal group all the way to the forefront of politics in that country. Now, the Muslim Brotherhood, I don't want people to think that the name there implies that there's, they're a group of radicals as bad as the clerical regime that we see in Iran. They're also not exactly what we would consider to be Boy Scouts. Their belief and treatment of women, their belief and treatment of other religions, such as the Coptic Christians.
Actually, Dennis, I have to interrupt. That does sound a lot like the American Boy Scouts. Right? I mean, they're anti-gay. There's there's a lot of. I think that there may be some similarities there. But go on. Yeah. Maybe not a good analogy.
I'll be a little bit more careful in my analogies, but there certainly are pluses and minuses to whatever group would eventually rule.
Right.
One of the things I've said about the way the revolution unfolded was that the young revolutionaries, by young, we're talking people in their late 20s, early 30s, who for 10 years have tried to overthrow Mubarak. They actually succeeded in doing so. The Muslim Brotherhood had absolutely nothing to do with and were not involved with the uprising on the 25th of January in 2010. So they were late to the party, but they also understood and knew politically how to win votes inside of areas. They became part of the massive rebuilding effort. And because, even though it's a secular nation of 80 million people, there are a large number of Muslims there in that Arab country. So it was not the far right party, but as far as they could go in terms of Muslim extremism. But the fact is that, they do want to have a form of Sharia law. And the U.S. has never really interfered in the internal affairs of Egypt. There was a case a few years back, just before the revolution started, of a young dissident who was beaten and killed in Alexandria. The State Department went into shock and outrage mode, basically slapped Egypt on the wrist and said, "Don't do it again." And it went away eventually. The conduct of our foreign policy in that part of the world has largely been to support these regimes that keep law and order, and Egypt gets the beneficiary of it.
All right, so make sure to check out Dennis's show at youtube.com/worldviewshow. Dennis, what's the big headline on the show this week?
Well, this week we're going back, as we will be for the next 2 weeks, and looking at the revolution itself. We have Ahmed Tharwat, who is based in the United States, but he's an Egyptian journalist who does a show called Beladan, which is with Open Arms on PBS, and he's going to be with us. And somebody you know very, very well is also joining us, Kendall Sheets. We're going to go back and look at the furore raised over the Scientology book by Lawrence Wright, and what's happening there, make comparisons to the Mormons and Mitt Romney. So I think that your viewers will enjoy watching this week.
Fantastic. So subscribe free. It takes a second. You won't miss any videos. youtube.com/worldviewshow. Dennis, thanks as always.
Thank you, David.
We talked last month about North Korea test firing a missile. Now, the response from the United Nations Security Council to the firing of that missile was number one, condemning it. Number two, tightening the existing sanctions on the regime. Now we see North Korea, after vowing to continue the launches and continue more of these long-range rocket tests, Pyongyang is going to carry out a third nuclear test, this one, quote, aimed at the U.S. Now, the language, you have to kind of parse through the language a little bit. They say, "We do not hide that a variety of satellites and long-range rockets, which will be launched by the Democratic People's Republic of Korea, one after another, and a nuclear test of higher level, which will be carried out by it in the upcoming all-out action, a new phase of the anti-U.S. struggle that has lasted century after century, will target against the U.S., the sworn enemy of the Korean people. So, when this happens, I really just feel bad for the North Korean people. That's really who I feel bad for, because they're living in... It's unnecessary in the sense that North Korea has brought the situation there upon themselves and upon the people who live there, who have no food, many of whom are in essentially concentration camps, who live an indoctrinated world to which they aren't even aware in many cases of an alternative. And all that we're seeing is basically the reinforcement of that situation through doing stuff like this. Now, I understand that when you deal with a country like North Korea, it's a very different situation than when you deal with a country like Iran. I understand that there are differences, and really what it comes back to here is just feeling bad for the people that, because of where lines were drawn, as we've covered, are physically different now than those in South Korea because of the generational malnutrition. And it's a sickening situation there.
It is, it's terrible. And of course, there is never any involvement by the U.S. because there are no natural resources there or anything at stake. And we're not going to do anything until we absolutely have to. I'd say when one of those nukes goes about halfway across the ocean,
right,
then we'll start seeing some action.
And that also probably won't end up being that good for the people of North Korea all of a sudden if the bombs start raining.
You never know. You never know.
Longer term, maybe. But it's a horrible situation.
Right.
Let's take a break. We've got an interview coming up. We have a lot of other stuff to discuss. DavidPakman.com/gear. Get yourself a David Pakman Show t-shirt or sweatshirt like the one Lewis is wearing, made from 100% recycled materials. We'll take a break. Back after this.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. Welcome back to the David Pakman Show.
Joining me is William Labov. He's a professor of linguistics at the University of Pennsylvania, also author of this book, Dialect Diversity in America, The Politics of Language Change. So, Professor Labov, thanks so much for being here. This is a fascinating topic to me. I think a good way to start would be, how many distinct dialects do you identify in the United States?
Well, on the map of our Atlas of North American English, there's about 15. They differ as far as their size and importance are concerned. People used to think of the American dialects as North, South, and General American. But there isn't any such thing as General American. There is, however, a distinction between the North, the Midland, in between, and the South.
So when people use this term, which I don't even know if it's a term you agree with, but kind of a generic American accent, what are they really referring to in your experience?
Well, there are some dialects where change is not so active, and I think that people point to the Midwest around Iowa as dialect that is missing some of the marked features of the Northeast, the South, or the North.
Let's shift a little bit and talk about changes that we can observe right now in American dialects. Now, one of them is the northern cities shift. Can you describe what that is and maybe give us some examples?
Well, I've got a map from the Atlas that to look at here, and we can see this area called the North outlined in blue, and within that there's an area called the Inland North, which is surrounding the Great Lakes. It includes cities like Syracuse, Rochester, Buffalo, Detroit, Cleveland, Toledo, Gary, Chicago, Madison, Milwaukee. That's a vast area of about 30 million people, and they all are marked by a new sound change that developed in the middle of the 20th century, which is quite remarkable. No one talks about it. No one makes fun of it. There's no stereotypes to do with it, but if you listen to people on the radio, you'll hear people saying things like, not what happened, but what happened. Not look at that, look at that.
Huh.
So all these words spelled with the short A, that, rap, mat, athletic, are pronounced mat, that, rap, athletic. You'll hear this from very educated people, from judges, from lawyers. It isn't as if it's a stigmatized feature at all. On the contrary, but it's a growing tendency which has reached its peak in this area. And then it brought about changes in other vowels, the neighboring vowels of the system, so that the words that are spelled with short O moved forward to the place where the short A used to be. So people in this area will say, not I've got the job, but I've got the job. And not a pair of socks, but a pair of sacks.
Huh.
This leads to a lot of misunderstanding across dialects, of course.
I'll say.
So then there's three other sounds. Perhaps one of the most striking ones is the one that is spelled, words are spelled with short U, and or sometimes O, as in bosses. So one of the experiments we have, people are listening to individual words and they hear the word bosses. And then a little later on they hear the bosses with the antennas on top. And then we used to ride on the bosses with the antennas on the top. And gradually people begin to realize that this person is pronouncing the word bus the way they pronounce boss.
Right.
So these rotations, this great rotation of 5 vowels it is what we call the Northern City Shift, and it is something that's growing and developing and becoming, perhaps someday it'll become conscious and people will talk about it. But right now, it's marking that most educated, Yankee-settled area of the American linguistic scene as quite different from any other.
The other one that you talk about is the vowel merger. And so an example of that would be, for example, the word caught, C-O-T, being pronounced the same way as to catch something, C-A-U-G-H-T. So talk about that one a little bit.
Well, I've got a map there for you to take a look at from the atlas showing the vast areas of the United States where caught and caught are pronounced the same. The area marked in green. And it includes eastern New England, where this started, and it includes western Pennsylvania, and all of Canada, and most of the West. So geographically, it's about half of the United States, even though in the population it's a little less. And in those areas, people say, I'm sleeping on a cot, and I've caught a cold. They talk about a boy named Don and a girl named Dawn will sound the same, which is a source of great confusion for people who are named Don and Dawn.
Right, so can do that one again. Do the different pronunciation for Don and Dawn, because I think I say it the same way. Give us the different one.
I'll give you 2 ways of exaggerating the difference.
Okay.
In New York, it's Don and Dawn. Don and Dawn. In Chicago, it's Dan and Don. But they're different. It'll be very hard for some of my listeners who are of the merger to hear the difference, because once 2 vowels have been decided they're the same, it's very hard to hear them as different.
The last thing I want to touch on, and this is kind of an interesting thing where I would just love to get your expert opinion. My producer, Lewis, we've observed that he has kind of his own dialect, which we've noticed that he speaks. And there's certain words that he pronounces in an unusual way, which I'll recreate for you, just to get your thought on where may this come from. Now, a little background on Lewis. Lewis was born and grew up in western Massachusetts, so outside of the kind of traditional Boston accent area. And his father learned English as a second language. His father's an immigrant from Iran, okay? Now, we've noticed a couple things Lewis does. A lot of words that here, for example, I would pronounce I go to high school, or I just purchased an item. Lewis pronounces I go to high school and I purchased an item. Okay, now another weird pronunciation for Lewis is the word I would say museum. Lewis tends to say museum. This is very specific to certain words. We have no idea where this came from, and Lewis doesn't either. Give us an idea, a hypothesis on this.
Well, the first group of words that you talked about has been a great focus of attention for us in Philadelphia. It's called Canadian raising, where people say not ice cream, but ice cream. Now, give me again the pronunciation that you hear from your friend Lewis.
So, whereas I would say ice cream, Lewis would say ice cream.
Well, the I diphthong is the big marker of north-south differences. So, and there are two ways that the North can differentiate from the South. One is to say ice cream. The other is to say ice cream.
Right.
Strong diphthong.
Is this unusual for Lewis, who grew up in Massachusetts, to just have these certain words that he pronounces this way?
Well, the certain words you're talking about, I assume, are not just an individual word, but a member of a group.
Right.
So people who say bike and write and sight also say pipe and life, taking the whole group of words that end in what we call voiceless consonants. So the example you gave of ice cream, and two examples are those that come before S, F, P, T, K, which are consonants that we call voiceless. I don't hear in your reproduction of Lewis's speech any of the major tendencies that are marked in New England.
I don't either, yeah.
No, it seems to be different. But in general, we could say that people are not marked by the pronunciation of their parents. You used to think that ethnicity, where your parents came from, would be the strongest influence on your local dialect. But it turns out that children somehow have the ability to turn away from the peculiar ways their parents speak if their parents are not native speakers of English. So the slightest influence on the development of a dialect is the way your parents spoke. This is surprising and indicates that children somehow have an uncanny ability to know what is the most useful form of language that they can use in communicating with their, not just their friends and their peers, but the whole world out there.
Well, we may have a question mark here with Lewis. I would think that, I would love to make him available to you for an in-depth study on just exactly what went on with how Lewis speaks, but that may be a broader project than just one person can take on. We may need a team to analyze that, Professor. This has been fantastic, though. We've been speaking with Professor William Labov, Professor of Linguistics at the University of Pennsylvania. I recommend the book Dialect Diversity in America, The Politics of Language Change. Professor, thank you so much for doing this.
It's a pleasure.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com. The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.
You know how the Catholic Church is always going on and on and on and on about the sanctity of life and a bunch of vague concepts about, cells and sperm or people and all that stuff, the sanctity of life and the start of life at conception. You know all that stuff, Lewis.
Well aware.
You're very well aware of it. We can't have an abortion because sperm is sacred, and cells are sacred, and a 2-day-old, I don't even know that we can call it a fetus, is sacred, etc. We can't have insurance coverage for many aspects of women's health care, according to the Catholic Church and Catholic employers and Catholic hospitals, because of freedom and because a fetus is also a person. All of this goes back to what, Lewis? It goes back to this idea that life begins at the very first instant of conception, and therefore the morning after pill and abortion, and we know the drill. We know the drill. The only problem is that apparently this doesn't apply when it might save the Catholic Church some money. There's a man suing a Catholic hospital for malpractice because his wife and the twins she was carrying inside of her died when she turned up at the emergency room, and her doctor never bothered to answer a page. Things are now getting a little bit tricky. The Catholic hospital, of course, adheres to the strict ethical and religious directives of the Catholic Church as set forth by the U.S. Conference of Catholic Bishops. And those include that the Church defends that life includes the unborn, and you must uphold the sanctity of life from the moment of conception until death. However, Jason Langley, who's an attorney with Denver-based Kennedy Childs, is arguing in one of the briefs that he filed for the defense of the hospital that the court shouldn't overturn the long-standing rule in Colorado that the term person, as used in the Wrongful Death Act, encompasses only individuals born alive, and that therefore you cannot have any kind of wrongful death claim based on unborn fetuses. The height of hypocrisy. You can't have an abortion because those fetuses are alive. But when it comes to being sued for malpractice, listen, unborn fetuses, according to the law, aren't alive. They're not people. You surprised?
Very convenient.
This is on paper now, the height of hypocrisy from the Catholic Church.
Nothing surprises me when it comes to the Catholic Church.
We should really be thanking the attorney for undermining everything that the Catholic Church has ever said about women and healthcare and fetuses and the sanctity of life just to save $1 here. It is all being completely undermined and really showing that the entire thing is completely baseless and empty. That's really what I'm hearing from it.
It's a good summarization, yeah.
Incredible. Let's go to voicemail. Our voicemail line, 219-2-DAVID-P. Call it 24 hours a day. Here's a voicemail from Ireland. Take a listen to this, Lewis.
Hey, David Pakman. I don't know why I said your full name just there. Anyway, I'm calling all the way from Dublin, Ireland. I love your show. I watch it on YouTube because, you know, we don't have, like, free speech TV. We just have free speech. I just want you to know that I think that the reason why you can handle the craziness that is some of your guests, like the Westboro Baptist Church guests, and I've seen you interview them. It's amazing. You're a pillar of restraint, and I think the reason why you can do that is because you've got the stoic Lewis looking at you like a owl, saying, "Don't get mad."
If people only knew that Lewis was often in the other room during interviews, they would be leaving very different voicemails. But great to hear from the Irish audience, Lewis.
Believe me, when it's the Westboro Baptist Church being interviewed,
I'm
in the
room.
Here.
You're in the room
with these on.
All right, here's an email about, or a voicemail about that Neanderthal baby possibility we talked about.
Hey, what's up, David? Laton and Lewis. This is Rob from Cabo again. My first voicemail of the new year. And, you know, it's funny, actually, I try to pick up the phone a lot whenever I listen to your show, but I try to wait for the right story. And as promised, I'm going to become a member in a few days here. I've been noticing the angry voicemails. You put a couple up, so as promised, I will become a member soon. And in the meantime, I'm currently, I just watched your story on the E. coli person, and I was reading a story here that you guys may comment on before I get to it, but it's a surrogate mother wanted for Neanderthal baby.
You know, in fact, we covered it on the same show. So it seems that there may be, I think what may be going on is that because of the time change to Cabo, where he's getting the show in a different order. That may be what's going on.
I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know. I've never heard of it before, but we did cover that in an interesting story and a voicemail about the music on the show. Take a listen to this.
Hey, guys, you were on pretty early in the morning. Is there any way you could change that raucous, whiny guitar solo to something acoustic? Thank you.
Little too early for the electric guitar for some people. You know, we're on at 2 p.m. Eastern. We have no control when we air on different affiliate stations, so I do apologize for that. But the music is always a work in progress here.
We used to rotate it every so often.
Yeah, maybe we need another rotation. We'll see. DavidPakman.com/membership. Sign up, support The David Pakman Show, and we'll see you next week for another great week of shows and bonus shows. See you then.
The David Pakman Show at davidpakman.com.